Reclaiming Abay, Ethiopia's letter to the UNSC breaks a colonial narrative. Earlier this month, Ethiopia officially inaugurated the GERD, and as expected, Egypt sent yet another letter to the UN Security Council, accusing the giant dam of threatening its very survival. Ethiopia replied with calm facts, but one detail stood out. In its response, Addis Ababa purposefully called the river Abay, not the Blue Nile. Only when referring to the larger basin did the letter use Nile. This detail may sound like a small thing. It isn't. Hi, I am Simon Mohammed, and this is Analytica Today. For more than a decade, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has been the center of disputes between Ethiopia and Egypt. And now that it has been completed without causing significant harm downstream, you might think the matter would settle. Instead, the arguments have only deepened. Cairo continues to insist the dam endangers its lifeline, and Addis Ababa insists it's exercising a right to use the water that springs from its own highlands. The latest exchange at the UN showed this divide clearly, not only in policy but in language. Egypt's letter repeated familiar grievances. The dam was unilateral, it violates international law, and it could have Egyptians thirsty and dry years. The language was urgent, as if GERD were a looming existential threat. Ethiopia's response was measured. It dismissed the accusation as baseless. It reminded the Council that Abay provides over 70% of Ethiopia's surface water, vital for more than 120 million people who lack the groundwater reserves and desalination options that Egypt enjoys. The letter turned Cairo's arguments around. The real issue, it said, is Egypt's wasteful use of water for unsustainable cities, its illegal out-of-basin transfers, and its reluctance to invest in alternatives like desalination. But here's where the story turns. Egypt's letter did more than refute claims. It purposefully called the river Abay inside its borders. Nile appeared only when describing the basin as a whole. That choice was no accident. For Ethiopians, Abay is not just water, it's lifeblood, history, culture, and identity. It shaped the land, inspired songs and legends, and sustained communities for millennia. The name Blue Nile was imposed later through colonial maps and treaties that treated the river only in terms of its importance to Egypt. To keep calling it that today is to ignore the people who live at its To keep calling it that today is to ignore the people who live at its source and to assume that the river's story begins only when it flows north. By reclaiming the name Abay, Ethiopia is also reclaiming agency. It is saying this is not simply a tributary of someone else's Nile. It's our river, within our land, part of our survival. This choice exposes the deeper mindset at play. For centuries, global imagination tied the word Nile exclusively to Egypt, even enriched in the phrase, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. And Egypt's legal claims still lean on colonial-era treaties, agreements made when upstream nations had no voice. Those documents effectively turned the Nile into an Egyptian entitlement. Ethiopia's letter subtly but powerfully breaks that frame. Imagine if the dispute were called the Abay dispute instead of the Nile dispute. Suddenly, the story changes. The word Nile always brings Egypt to mind. Abay remains the word that the river has another identity, another people, and another history. And the reality on the ground proves it. The GERD was not built on the Nile. It was built on Abay inside Ethiopia. It now generates electricity that lights homes, power factories, and earns foreign exchange. This is Ethiopia using its own resources for its own development. So what began as another exchange of letters at the UN became something more symbolic. The dam is not changing just the flow of water, but the language of power. By insisting on Abay, Ethiopia is reminding the world that rivers have no names given by their own people, and rights shaped by those who live along them. The GERD is dam on Abay, an Ethiopian river that flows into the Nile, and in that simple truth lies a break from the colonial mindset that once renamed everything in its past. That's all for today. Until next time, I am Simon Mohammed, and this is Analytica Today.